Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing a drawing of a monarch butterfly using colored pencils and pastels. Let's see how it was done. I don't know if you can tell, but I already have a faint sketch in place. I used a tracing method to create that sketch so that it would be easier for me to draw all of these tiny shapes on the butterfly's wings. And I'm using regular paper this time, which means that I'm going to be working mostly from light to dark. That means that I'm not going to be able to draw lighter shapes on top of the darker layers like I often do when I work in sanded paper. And that is why I have to work around the lighter shapes. So I'm using a black pencil to draw the shape of these lighter details on the butterfly wings. Some of them are going to be of white color, others are going to be of yellowish or orangey color. But either way, I will have to work around them simply by coloring around them with a black pencil, like I'm doing here. It's a little bit more difficult that way, it's a little bit slower, but like I said, since I am working on regular paper rather than sanded paper, I don't really have the option to work from dark to light. So I'm just going to reserve the light space for the lighter colors. It's a little bit of extra work because I have to be careful around these edges, but it's not really a big deal because the subject itself, apart from the elaborate pattern on the wings, is not overly challenging, I think. So I'm just going to have to be careful here around these lighter shapes, and then I can start working with some more vibrant colors. So I'm just going to keep doing that with a black pencil. The size of the paper this time is a little bit smaller. It's around 8 by 10 inches, so it's about 10 inches in length. And the pencils I'm using are, for the most part, the Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils. So here I started filling in some of these lighter, more colorful details, and I'm going to use a couple of different pencils. It's mostly going to be some orangey colors, but the cadmium orange is going to dominate. So this is like a slightly lighter yellowish orange, because as I've examined the reference photos, I saw that some parts of those wings are, or at least some of those shapes, are a little bit more yellowish than orangey. Others, on the other hand, are almost like a reddish orange, which is why I'm going to be using this slightly darker cadmium orange for the most part. That's going to be pretty much my main color for the wings. I will also layer these two, and every now and then I will go back in with a black pencil and work around the edges to make a more of a smoother transition between the orange part and the black part of the wing. Around the edges, at the tip of the wing, we can see some white details and I don't really need to do anything with those, they can just remain white, so that is why I had to reserve the light space. But I also had to reserve the light space for these lighter colors like orange and yellow, because obviously if I put the black down first, it would be nearly impossible for me to work on top of that with a lighter pencil like that. So once again, I'm working with a black pencil here, drawing some of these smaller shapes It's always the slower and I suppose the less fun part of the drawing process, where I have to draw these darker lines and then I can start coloring in between them. This is why I decided to use the tracing method to draw the initial sketch, because I found that the pattern of the wings was a little bit too elaborate. So I thought that it would be much faster if I just did the initial sketch by using tracing. And I often use a combination of tracing and freehand. The only difference is that most of the time I do more work in freehand than using the tracing method, but here I did a more elaborate sketch using the tracing method because I needed to put in all of those tiny shapes, because measuring and trying to position each and every one of them accurately would obviously take quite a bit of time. So you can see here, because in some of these segments which are orange yellow or yellowish orange, I have to layer the colors. I put in the lighter color first. I put in this yellowish orange first, and then I work on top of that with this cadmium orange. And that way I get a nice transition from the darker and warmer part of the wing onto the lighter, more yellowish part of the wing. And it's important for me to capture that transition, because if I color in everything with a single color, the wings will look kind of simplistic. They won't look as vibrant, and obviously they won't look as realistic. I didn't draw the antenna on the head. I will do that later. I will do that at the end when I do the background. And I'm back to working on the other wing again with a black color pencil, using the same approach of carefully drawing these smaller shapes which are supposed to remain of lighter value. So my initial idea when I looked at the reference was to do an out of focus bokeh background of some sort, and I figured if I am not going to use sanded paper, and I didn't feel like using sanded paper for this one, I would have to go with pastel for the background in order to get that really smooth background, because if you try to do that with colored pencil, you would get lines, you would get texture, and it would just take a lot of time. With pastels, it just takes a few minutes. So I decided to use a combination of colored pencil and pastel. I did a similar thing, or pretty much the same thing, with the drawing of a bird I did recently, and I think that worked pretty well. The thing is that not only does the pastel allow you to create an out of focus bokeh background, it also makes it easier to cover a large area, and it makes it easier to create that contrast between the well-defined, detailed main subject and the out of focus blurry background. Because when you work on colored pencils on something like I'm doing here, colored pencils will create a little bit of texture, a little bit of random detail. Texture is basically suggestion of detail or illusion of detail, and those tiny details will draw the attention of the viewer, and they will create a nice contrast with the background. For those areas where I want to appear smoother, I can just layer pencils until I get them to look smoother. And the way I do that is I go back and forth between darker and lighter pencils. So if I want to soften the texture on a part of a wing, I simply go over that with a lighter pencil, and that kind of blurs and muddies the colors a little bit. You'll notice also that I go back and forth not only with the yellowish orange and the cadmium orange, but also with the black and the orange as well. You can see around the edges of those orangey shapes, I always go back with a black pencil to create some smaller, darker lines to create that transition between the black and the orange, so that I can make those fine butterfly wings look more natural. And then another thing I do is I go back on top of that with an orange, with a cadmium orange, and I further soften those lines and that transition. Every now and then, I don't know if you noticed, I've also added a touch of red color to some of these darker orangey parts, because I felt like I needed a touch of red in some places so that I could make more of a contrast between those lighter yellowish parts, which look like they're a little bit more transparent, and the darker orangey parts, which are closer to the edge of the wings, closer to the black areas. So I'm just about done with this black border area on the lower part of the wing here, and now I'm just going to do the rest with this cadmium orange. Of course, I'm going to be going back and forth with a darker and a lighter pencil so that I could layer everything nicely and smoothly. And also going back in with a black pencil here and there to create a more natural looking edge, and then going on top of that with an orange to soften it. Now, I actually combined a couple of different reference photos and then I made changes to all of them. So I picked a photo of a butterfly on a flower, and the flower looked completely different than the one that I'm about to draw here. And the reason why that is so is because I felt that I needed slightly different colors. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about this, I talk about these things, I talk about these decisions at length in my in my full-length Patreon videos. So almost all of my drawings are available on Patreon in a full-length version, and there's also a lot more additional content there. So if you are interested in that sort of thing, you should check out my Patreon. Anyway, I decided to go with slightly different colors, both for the middle part of the flower, which I'm going to make a little bit more yellowish, and for the petals of the flower, which are in this case going to be of bluish color, but I picked a cooler bluish color. I used a couple of different blues. I started with a sky blue, and then for the darker areas I used some ultramarine, and then a darker deep blue for some of the darkest shadow areas. So the reason why I made these changes was because I felt like some of the colors in the original references really didn't go together, and the reason they didn't go together was because some of the colors were a little bit too similar to the colors on the main subject, which would, I don't really know how to explain it, but maybe they would blend in with the main subject, and it would be difficult for the viewer's mind to discern where the main subject ends and the flower begins, where the butterfly ends and the flower begins. So I decided to go with complementary colors, and because I have some orangey, yellowish orangey tones on the butterfly, I thought that these would go well against the bluish color of the flower. And also for the background, I'm going to have a greenish color, which will go well against the reddish orange parts of the butterfly's wings. So that was my logic, and you'll be the judge on whether it worked or not, but I think that in comparison to the original reference photo, because I manipulated the colors, I was able to come up with more striking looking composition, where the shapes and the elements stand out better because of the complementary colors. Anyway, as you can see, I'm working patiently on layering the petals of this flower, and I'm going back and forth between lighter and darker blues in order to create a more three-dimensional looking shape. For those areas which need to remain lighter because they're kind of curving down, and the part that is bulging out is more exposed to the light, I will simply leave it white, use less color on it, and then work on top of that additionally with a white pencil to smooth out the transition. And this is going to be the stem. I'm just going to use a darker green pencil for it and add a little bit of shadow at the very top under the flower itself, because the petals are going to be casting a bit of shadow onto this part of the stem. And then I'm just going to go back and forth with some greens and maybe a touch of red. And after that I need to finish the rest of the petals. Again, I'm working with a combination of a couple of different blues. Like I said, I used the sky blue for the lighter color, lighter bluish color, and the ultramarine as a sort of a mid-tone, and then a dark blue for some of the shadow areas. And I would, to soften the texture, I would layer the lighter pencils on top of the darker ones. Especially the white pencil is good at that, good at smoothing out that texture, but I have to use it sparingly, obviously, because I don't want the shapes to end up looking flat or too muddy. So I want to retain that range of value. But like I said, I can always go back and forth between lighter and darker pencils. So I think what we have now, as I'm sort of completing the shape and the color of this flower, is we have a very nice contrast in colors, and the shape of the butterfly stands out very nicely against the shape and the colors of the flower. And once I finish that, I'll be ready to do that out of focus blurry background, for which obviously I will need pastels. Just a little bit more work on some of these petals, and a little bit of softening with a white pencil and a light blue pencil, and then going back in with a darker blue pencil to create those shadow areas. I also created a little bit of shadow under the butterfly's body. Now, I'm going to use 3 pastel sticks, or at least pieces of pastel sticks. I'm going to use this light yellowish green as a base layer to get more of a yellowish color. And then I'm going to use a darker green on top of that. All of my soft pastels are Koh-i-Noor soft pastels. They're very soft and vibrant. So I'm going to layer this dark green on top of that. And then for the darkest bits around the corners, I'm going to add a touch, or around the edge, I'm going to add a touch of black pastel. So now I'm going to blend all of that together with my finger. And there are parts of this process which will be a little bit tricky. That's because I have to be careful around the edges. Now, it's not a disaster if I go over the edge a little bit here and there. I can clean up the edge with a kneaded eraser, or I can just draw on top of that with a colored pencil. But I don't want to make a mess. So I'm rotating the drawing so that it would be easier and more comfortable for me to blend to the edge and not go over the edge, and I have to be careful with that. I also have to be careful to push the pastel all the way to the edge so that I can avoid the halo effect or the glowing effect around the main subject. In some places I may like that sort of an effect, but in other places I may want, or most of the time I may want, a cleaner, sharper edge to value, a cleaner transition, so that the main subject would stand out against the background. And as you can see, I've blended almost the entire background, and it took only a few minutes. Pastels are very, very quick to work with. They can be a little bit messy, but I feel like for this purpose that I intended to use them to create that out of focus background and to get some smooth blending, smooth transitions, they are much, much, much better than colored pencils. You may also be wondering, what about fixing? Well, that's not a problem either, because when I fix them, and I will fix them thoroughly with a fixative, they will get a little bit darker, but that's not as much of a problem on white paper as it is on some darker toned papers. I'm adding a little bit of darker color around the edges. I want this to look a little bit darker so that I could get maybe a bit more contrast, and so that the lighter colors of the main subject would stand out in the middle. Anyway, so like I said, fixing is not going to be a problem because the colors aren't going to change that much, because when the background color is white, or the paper is white, the colors don't darken as noticeably, so that's not going to be a huge issue. And after all, the main focus should be on the butterfly anyway. So I'm just doing some final blending here, and as you can see, I blended all of that with my finger. And now that I've sprayed everything with a fixative, I'm just putting down some finishing touches with colored pencils. I am working on this stem so that the stem would stand out against the background a little bit better. It kind of got blended into the rest of the scene. And I'm also going to clean up some of the edges and some of the shapes on the butterfly itself, where maybe some of the edges got a little bit blurry. And the same goes with the flower. Anyway, I'm going to put my signature with a black pencil here in the lower right corner. It's going to be barely noticeable. And I'm almost done. I forgot to draw the antenna, so I'm going to put them in now. Just a few small shapes with a black pencil. And now, as you can see, the drawing is done. I hope you liked the way it turned out, and I hope you found the video useful. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for more content. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.